In this episode, we speak with Jeff Black, partner and Global M&A Business Leader at Mercer. Jeff brings more than 25 years of experience advising on over 300 transactions, offering strategic and financial guidance across global people risks, including commercial due diligence, culture risk mitigation, post-merger integration, and other areas. Jeff was recognized as one of the top 25 M&A consultants and leaders of 2025. Mercer helps its clients realize their investment objectives, shape the future of work, and enhance health and retirement outcomes. The firm does this by meeting the needs of today and tomorrow, understanding the data and applying it with a human touch, and turning ideas into action to spark positive change. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the Executive Chairman of Market Insight Media and Managing Partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Top Consultant, a podcast featuring today's best consultants who advise and provide services to corporations, governments, nonprofits, and other organizations. Executives and key decision makers tune in to Top Consultant to identify the most knowledgeable and experienced consultants for their most important projects.
Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.
You cover a very interesting space in the consulting realm, and that is M&A. There's consistently activity happening in M&A. Sometimes it's high volume, sometimes it's lower volume, but there's consistently activity. There's a lot of different things to consider when companies merge or one acquires another. Can you tell us about the various ways in which you advise and consult companies related to M&A?
Yeah, and so I work for Mercer, right? And Mercer, kind of outside of M&A, is focused on really anything that's people related in an organization. So anything that involves people, touches people, et cetera. That's really the span of what we do from a global standpoint. So you sort of take that as a base and then put the lens of, any types of transaction, merger, acquisition, divestiture, joint venture, partnership. That's really the space that we interact in. So there's a lot of different ways that evolves. Obviously, all those different types of deals have different implications in terms of what might be important kind of people, human capital areas versus ones that are a little more deprioritized. And then obviously each deal in and of itself is unique. Right? Mm-hmm. Why is somebody doing it? What's the geographic footprint? What industry is it, et cetera? So there's a lot of different variables that go into it, but our core and anchor, is always around sort of that human capital, people space related to the deal.
Mm-hmm. And typically, say if you're working or advising on the buy side, and it could be either a large corporate or it could be a private equity firm, I presume. And typically there's a shortish window to affect change and merge people, and sometimes it does impact kind of redundancies or duplications in roles. How do you go about doing that for someone to understand like where Mercer kind of comes in and say it's a 100-day plan to affect, some significant transformation in the combined organization?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And so maybe point to a couple of frameworks that we use. So one of them is what we refer to as our value creation process, right? And if you think about that, again, really high level with any deal or any situation, it sort of breaks down into there's inputs related to it. And the inputs would be sort of around the deal thesis. Why are you doing the deal? What's your vision? What are you trying to create at a high level? That could be, as you mentioned, that could be revenue stream increase. It could be, synergy takeouts. It could be a lot of different things or combinations of things. Then there's usually some view into different parts of the organization, sort of what the new organization would look like. That could have commercial impact to how you're interacting with your customers. It could be product offering. It could be internal processes, right, that are going to get changed. But there's usually some connection to how things are going to change related to the setup of the business. Those two things are really the inputs we take when then we think about sort of the human capital platform within the organization to think about, okay, if that's sort of the business that you want to create, what does the human capital platform need to look like? And when we look at that human capital platform, we look across 7, what we call kind of value levers, right? So that is made up of organizational design and governance, leadership, talent, change management, communications, total rewards, as well as the HR delivery system, right? So it's kind of across those levers. But then to your point, that looks different at different points in the deal process. So when you're looking at due diligence, obviously short window that's very focused on value and value identification or valuation. Which of those things are important and what things you actually have line of sight to in diligence will look one way. Once you get past that and you're sort of dealing with day one and thinking about day one, the theme there for us is really around business continuity. So how do you maintain sort of the business? It may not be quite the vision you want yet, but you need to maintain it, hit those first year numbers, again, kind of thinking across those levers and trying to think through that. And then finally, you actually, once you get past day one and probably a little bit of space as you stabilize things, you actually get to why you did the deal, which is you get into the phase of now it's value creation. Like this is what we wanted to do. Again, thinking about that and thinking across those levers and what needs to be prioritized, et cetera. So all those move at the pace of the deal at each one of those points, as well as the data that's available. But it's always important to kind of keep those frames, but you keep coming back to, even when you gather those inputs at the very beginning, you have to constantly come back. And as you're at day one, thinking about, okay, why are we doing this deal again? What is it that they were trying to accomplish so that you're sort of continuing to push towards that North Star?
Hmm. I'd like to get into your background because you've been at the firm and think in this kind of vertical for nearly 3 decades, if I'm not mistaken. But before we do that, is there an example that you could share about maybe how you were able to help either on the buy side or the sell side where you're particularly satisfied with the outcome of your engagement with that client?
Yeah, I'll give you a real quick example. And again, it's snapshot. It doesn't go across that whole continuum, but I think it gives a little bit of insight. We ended up supporting on a deal. It was a private equity firm that was going to buy a manufacturing organization, two main production facilities, one in Germany, one that is located in South America. We hadn't been involved in the diligence that was handled by others, but when we came in, it was pre-day one. We started with the input point, right? What are you trying to create? Looked at the financial model, et cetera, and could see that a lot of the thesis around it was, sort of buy the organization, wind down the operations in Germany because they were very high cost, shift that production capacity into South America, and then actually build out the production capacity in South America. So those were, very main points of the thesis. As we started kind of looking at it, though, and digging into it a little bit more, one of the things that we noticed was first and foremost that when you looked at the facility in Germany, it had a very high tenured employees. German law is around some of the works councils as well. Unwinding and getting rid of those employees, quite expensive, especially more tenured. That really hadn't been factored into the model financially. So that was sort of, again, one piece that we called out. There's also timing to how quickly they were going to wind it down. And in terms of the Works Council, the timing was not going to be something that was possible or met. So there was some need to kind of have that conversation with the model. And then the final thing that we noticed was that when we looked at in the South America operations, we looked a little bit more into the talent acquisition kind of capabilities and capacities of that location. And again, there was this in the model, there was going to be a big hiring ramp up. When we looked at it, if you look like the past 5 years, cumulatively in the last 5 years, they hadn't hired as many people as they were assuming they'd hire in the first 6 months. So there were some very basic things that were built into the math and the thesis. Again, the thesis from a conceptual standpoint was fine. From an execution standpoint, there were some issues with that. So we were able to step in, obviously point those things out, but we just don't point out, here's what's not going to work and here's what's wrong. We were able to, again, through kind of our mix of experience of doing other deals, strategic view on deals, as well as Mercer's kind of deep subject matter execution capabilities, we're able to kind of figure out some paths and some ways to get much closer to that financial line that they had modeled out originally on some assumptions that weren't great. So really good outcome. Happy that we were able to jump in kind of before they had gotten to day one and we're dealing with everything. And we could try to get it a little more on track before they got to that.
Excellent. Now let's head into your background. Have you always been working in this vertical? And what is it about Mercer that made you stay there for nearly 3 decades now?
So interestingly, I didn't get like full time into M&A and M&A consulting until about 10 or 11 years ago. My time at Mercer prior to that, and I worked at a few other organizations before, I did work around US healthcare, and it was really advising employers around their healthcare programs in the US. Super complex, really interesting, still continues to be really interesting how that's changing. I had done deal work, a lot of deal work when I was in that space. But again, it was confined to, one geography, the US, because the US medical system is very unique. And then obviously it was focused on healthcare. And I became really interested in the possibility and the challenges with the scope when you look at everything that has to be dealt with in the human capital space related to deals. So there's again, sort of that, kind of 7 lever list that I've laid out to you when we think about human capital. That's very broad. That was really interesting. And then you layer in for a lot of the deals, at least that we work on, over half, probably around 60% involve multiple countries. And so all those things look very different in multiple countries. So that was really interesting to me in terms of the space and the sort of the challenges and the learning and those opportunities that I'd face from that standpoint. From a Mercer standpoint, as you alluded to, I've been at Mercer, it's my 28th year at Mercer. I think a couple of things. Every place I've worked has had great, smart people. I think that's true of really every place. What I've really kind of appreciated is the culture at Mercer. It is very much around collaboration, teamwork, really putting the client first, and then thinking about with the immensity of all of the depth and breadth of resources that we have, how can we sort of pull those pieces together, right, and give the client sort of the best outcome? And there's not a lot of barriers within the organization in terms of structure and otherwise that sort of prevents us from doing that. So I always appreciated that when I was in the health business. I beyond appreciate it now that I'm in the M&A business, because it's really nice to be able to sit in front of a business leader, hear what they're trying to do. And I may not personally know exactly how to solve it, but I'm very comfortable that the organization behind me, we've got kind of the knowledge and the know-how to do that, and we just need to put that team together.
Is there one clear, distinct difference between Mercer and maybe its competitors? I know it's hard to really delineate between firms these days because everyone does everything, but what
Yeah.
would be like the one thing you would point out about Mercer?
I'll maybe do a 1A, 1B. If that's okay. It's cheating, I
Sure.
know. It's really a combination of two things, right? One is if you look at sort of just the volume of deal work that we support, we usually touch over 1,000 deals kind of on a global basis per year. So we're seeing a lot of deals, and that's great from a business standpoint, but from a expertise, what we can bring to other clients, et cetera, there's a lot of value from that standpoint. I think though you marry that with the power of Mercer and full Mercer, and the way that our model works is while I run a group specifically focused on the deal space, when we support our clients, we tap into the entire breadth of Mercer. We'll also pull in our sister businesses of Marsh and OW as well. And so like if I look within Mercer, we've got 30,000 plus subject matter experts to pull in to any given situation. I think that's great, but what that brings is not just that breadth of understanding of the topic. We have expertise from strategy to execution.
Mhm.
And at the heart of it, there's a lot of organizations that can provide strategy. I think there's a lot of organizations that can provide plans related to that strategy. I don't think that there are a lot that across the entirety of the scope I'm talking about that can also do the execution of that and provide resources with that. But what we also do, because we do that back half, is that the strategy we provide and the planning we provide is grounded in execution. So you're not going to get from a Mercer team in a deal a strategy or a plan where when you actually go to do it, it's something that really can't be done, or it's so impossible it's not practical to be done. So I think that that combination of what we bring is just so important, because deals at the end of the day are about execution. Strategy is only as good as the execution piece of it, and I think we do that better than anybody.
Mm-hmm. Whenever we talk about M&A, folks are generally interested in understanding what the market dynamic is currently at this moment. What are you seeing in the market? Is it particularly active? Is it somewhat muted at the moment? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think the way that you talked a little bit about the market at the beginning is a good description of it. There's a lot of activity from discussions, things being looked at, things being evaluated, like I'd say a lot of that front end work. I think that we're still seeing a little bit of choppiness related to deals actually getting over the line and kind of being announced and those kinds of things. And like we see that in the deal side, we see that on IPOs, we see that on exit from PE, all those things, right, really kind of feed into the same ecosystem. So I think not quite the environment that we thought it was going to be when we were coming into this period, but we are starting to see some signs of things loosening a little bit. And again, I just think that there's a lot of pent up demand that probably might talk in a few months and there's so much we don't know what to do. So
Mm-hmm. One kind of standard question that has become part of this set of interviews is, how are you using AI, or how are you advising clients to use AI?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. So when I think about how we're using it, and again, as I talk to clients and they're trying to, figure out how to use it as well, no surprise, I think a lot of people are doing the same thing. Anything that it can do to help sort of enable a lot of the manual work, right, that goes into M&A. You alluded to there are especially certain time periods like due diligence that run, very fast. That's probably going to get shorter and shorter. And I go way back when I, first started in this space. When you went to look at data, you actually went and sat in a physical room. It was usually more like a closet, and there were piles of boxes and those kinds of things. Those days are gone, right? That's all digital. But AI, in terms of being able to kind of, process huge amounts of data, et cetera, that's certainly been helpful. And those are tools that we're building out. We're also using it, though, to help to the extent, there's a lot of public information that's available around some of the topics that we deal with. It's not everything you need to know. It's not going to give you the answer, right? But if you think about sort of the deal process from just kind of different steps to gain insights around critical pieces, being able to kind of leverage that tool in that process to kind of help with those types of things, I think is really good. And again, I think the challenge it's presenting to us, and it presents to all advisors, is you've really got to up your game on the advising piece. The data is getting more and more accessible. Being able to kind of churn through it is getting, on a relative basis, easier and easier. And it really comes to your knowledge, your experience, the organization's experience that you work for, being able to take that information and turn it into insights and things that people can act on.
Mm-hmm. Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who's had a profound influence on you?
Yeah. So one of our ex-CEOs said something that really stuck with me. One of the things we do a lot of work with organizations around is retention, right? That's almost on everybody's list. We're doing a deal. How do we retain the key people? And I remember her telling me that when I think about retention, right, and she was speaking specifically about the financial part of retention, all I've done is I paid to know when that person's going to leave. That's all it's bought, right? It's bought me that, and it's bought me how long I've got to figure out if I want them to stay and what I can do to convince them to stay. And that notion of sort of retention versus engagement versus truly kind of connecting and staying with the organization, that stuck with me from a deal standpoint, but quite honestly, from a broader leader standpoint, like just interacting with people standpoint, all those kinds of things. There's always things that you can do to kind of in a short-term moment, get somebody's attention or trust or credibility or whatever that is. But, it's really about how do you sort of take that, but sort of build that to something that's lasting longer and more deep in nature. That's always stuck with me.
Excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah. So there's an organization that we work with here in Chicago that's called Crayons and Beyond. And it is all about trying to get school supplies to kids in underserved neighborhoods. But the other thing as well, which was really interesting, they also look at the food aspect of things. And so, we're heading into the summer months. There's a lot of families from the kids' standpoint, they get their meals when they go to school. And so when school's out, they're not getting lunch. They may not be getting breakfast. They may only have access to dinner. And so it's an organization that kind of tries to fill those gaps, which I think is just fantastic.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
I appreciate it as well. Thanks for having me.